the GOP lost when it came to same-sex marriage. They lost like losers. Only 4 Republicans voted in favor of it, and 3 of them were immediately voted out for doing so. And now, almost 10 years later, this same party is clearly trying to find ways for individual states to pass laws that bring them back to an era where LGBTQ people didn't have so many pesky rights. They don't care if the laws make sense or can be easily defeated in courts. What matters is that they keep that ball in the air for as long as possible, delay this obvious progress in the hopes that they can keep their own superiority intact. They're just prolonging their existence at the expense of others, like vampires, or more commonly known, Balaam Abrasax from the hit film Jupiter Ascending. And just like Jim Crow laws and the runtime of Cloud Atlas, this could last way longer than it has any right to. Because ultimately, these conservatives just don't like gay people. But no, they can't say that. That's why these laws are so weird and vague and nonsensical, because they're all trying to find loopholes around blatantly stating their prejudice. And for that reason, and just like Jim Crow laws, these anti-LGBTQ laws will ultimately fall apart. I mentioned this run of laws aimed at allowing medical professionals to deny care based on their conscience. As one South Carolina bill states, no medical practitioner, healthcare institution, or healthcare payer should be compelled to participate in or pay for any medical procedure or prescribe or pay for any medication to which the practitioner or entity objects on the basis of conscience, whether such conscience is informed by religious, moral, ethical, or philosophical beliefs or principles. That bill also protects those practitioners from legal repercussions for discrimination. And while this is clearly aimed at trans people, they aren't allowed to just flat out say that. And so because of the extremely vague wording, it could be used to discriminate against literally anyone based on philosophical beliefs. By that definition, a vegetarian doctor could legally choose to not treat you because you're wearing a leather jacket. Hell, they could not treat you for liking the band Stained, which frankly should come with a penalty, but not from doctors. It is hard to fully appreciate the fact that, when you get down to it, this proposed law is basically saying to doctors, do no harm unless they bother you. It is so broadly defined so as to be both ineffective and legally explosive, and if enforced, could gunk up the system so bad that it ultimately gets thrown out, along with all the other laws trying to do this. Of course, I do want to be very clear here. These laws are bad, cruel, harmful laws that in the immediate short term will absolutely have a negative impact on the LGBTQ people, primarily children being affected by them. Trans people in the US already face incredibly high barriers of entry to the basic possibility of participating in public life. They're banned from equal education, targeted by state departments, prevented from receiving life-saving medical care, harassed in bathrooms no matter which one they use. The list goes on. We didn't even mention all of the recent attempts to ban trans athletes, which could fill an entirely separate episode. Not only are these things bad on their own, but they have the added effect of preventing trans people from entering the formal labor market, let alone acquiring the huge expense of medical transition, assuming they survive that long, considering how often they get f***ing murdered or take their own lives. The current legislative pushes aim to permanently confine queer people, especially trans people, to the informal economy, and in some states actively criminalize their existence. Fire the teacher for saying he's gay? They want people to be afraid to exist, is what they want. If the push succeeds, if these bills pass in any widespread way, the state will have effectively declared itself cisgender and heterosexual for the first time, in the same way that under Jim Crow it declared itself white. These laws frame themselves as making moral arguments about the validity of trans existence, and they are doing that, but they're not only doing that. Gender-affirming care, for example, is not only moralized as self-mutilation and or child abuse, it's also framed as prohibitively expensive and as a luxury. A cosmetic procedure in the same category as lip fillers, or an expensive dye job, or getting metal teeth so you can bite open beer cans. It's not a coincidence that the defunding of reproductive health, the banning of abortion, and the goal of banning contraception are all tied up in the political and legal strategy of anti-trans policies. By relegating all trans-adjacent healthcare to the private sector, and then relegating trans people to lower, second-class citizens, the state can effectively prohibit transness altogether without having to put it into law. And that is a scary, terrible thing. However, the light at the end of this very long, dark tunnel is this. History will look back on this treatment of trans people in the same way we look back on the Jim Crow era today, with disgust, shame, and the lingering feeling that if you'd paid slightly better attention during 11th grade history, you might be able to know what's going on more often. The conservatives are fighting a losing battle, and it's the exact same losing battle they've been fighting every 30 years for the past 150 years. This is possibly the fatal flaw with conservatism as an ideology altogether. Despite what the hit film Cloud Atlas might tell you, time moves forward whether we like it or not, and we move right along with it, whether you like it or not. Progressivism, making progress, feels intuitive and natural because we really have no other option other than to move with the current. And to try to do anything else means not only standing still, but pushing back against the flow and attempting to reverse the tide. Because that's where the conservative side of things takes us, in the end. Do you think, seriously, that people like James Lindsay and Ben Shapiro and Ronald DeSantis want to stop at just these anti-trans laws? Or perhaps, will they keep pushing us backward little by little? But again, people like them have been fighting this same fight over and over again with different goalposts because they keep losing. Before this, they lost the fight for gay marriage. And before that, they lost the civil rights movement. And before that, they lost to the suffragist movement. And before that, they lost the fucking Civil War. It's all the same fight, and we're already seeing with the Don't Say Gay bill and the recent resurgence of conflating queerness and pedophilia that if they win the fight against trans people, they'll immediately push back towards their next battleground. And so on until every minority group has been stripped of their rights and America is great again. It's like an incredibly high-stakes game of Team Fortress 2, except instead of fighting for glowing checkpoints, you're fighting for the basic human rights of marginalized people. Don't know, haven't played it. The point I'm trying to make here is that if the last century of American history can serve as any kind of precedent, the conservatives will lose this fight eventually. That said, how fast they lose depends on us, and how hard we fight against them, and point out what obviously lying liars they are. And of course, saying we'll win eventually doesn't do shit for the kids who are right this moment being targeted by laws either currently or about to be on the books. So, on the screen, there should be a bunch of different links to organizations dedicated to helping trans and LGBTQ youth, and all those links will be somewhere in the description as well. So you can click on them and then be taken to their website and then give them money in the form of a donation. Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Here's the evergreen end plate to ask you to like and subscribe. It's any day of the year where you are.